19 men sat on the throne of the northern kingdom of Israel. 19 kings over roughly 210 years. Not one of them, not a single one, is described as faithful. The biblical writers evaluated every king of Israel and every king of Judah based on their relationship with God's covenant. And when it came to the northern kingdom, the verdict was unanimous: 19 for 19. Every one of them did evil in the sight of the Lord. But this isn't just a list of bad kings. What the text gives us is a pattern, a slow-motion collapse stretching across 2 centuries. A story about what happens when people trade God for power. Can you hold worldly influence and maintain spiritual devotion at the same time? And every one of them answered, no. But to feel how far they fell, you have to feel what they fell from. Go back centuries before. A divine entity made a promise to Abraham regarding a significant future event. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. Genesis 12 verse 2. From Abraham came Isaac. From Isaac came Jacob, whom God renamed Israel. From Israel came 12 sons, 12 tribes, and a nation unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. A nation that didn't belong to a king. It belonged to God. God led them through the wilderness, gave them his law at Sinai, and brought them into the land he'd promised. When they finally demanded a king, God told the prophet, "They have not rejected you, but me." The idea of a human king was a concession. God was supposed to be enough. David united all 12 tribes under one throne in a prominent city, overcoming adversaries. He brought the Ark of the Covenant into the capital, making Jerusalem the heart of the nation. God made a promise: your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever. David's son Solomon inherited that promise and built the temple, the house of God. It took 7 years to build, with cedar from Lebanon and stones dressed at the quarry. The inner sanctuary was overlaid with pure gold. When dedicated, God's glory filled it, and the glory of the Lord filled it so completely that the priests couldn't even stand to minister. The glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. Under Solomon, Israel reached its peak of power and prosperity, living in safety. Every man under his vine and under his fig tree, all the days of Solomon. No war, no invasion, no fear. Every family secure, every tribe at rest. Foreign rulers traveled to hear Solomon's wisdom. A prominent queen remarked, "The full extent was beyond what I had heard." That was Israel. 12 tribes, one God, one temple, one throne, peace from border to border. And then, it shattered. Solomon broke the covenant that made his kingdom possible. He loved many foreign women, who turned his heart off to other gods. He built shrines for them. God spoke to him directly, "I will surely tear the kingdom from you." But for David's sake, God would not do it in Solomon's days, only give one tribe to his son. Solomon died. His son Rehoboam took the throne. The northern tribes asked Rehoboam to lighten the heavy taxes and forced labor imposed by Solomon. Rehoboam consulted his father's older advisors, who told him to listen. Then he turned to the young men he'd grown up with, who told him to show strength. Rehoboam's exact words, "My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions." The 10 northern tribes walked away. The kingdom split in two. It would never be whole again. Into that fractured nation stepped the first king, a figure named Jeroboam. Jeroboam was a fascinating figure. God had promised him an enduring dynasty. A higher power, through a wise messenger, promised Jeroboam an enduring dynasty if he walked in certain ways. "If you follow these principles, I will establish a lasting legacy for you." A similar agreement a figure named David received. Jeroboam threw it away before the paint dried on the throne room. Jeroboam had a problem. Jerusalem, with the temple, was in Judah, his rival's territory. Jeroboam was afraid. "If this people go up to Jerusalem, they will kill me." That's the root. Not theology, not conviction, just fear. He built 2 golden calves, one in Bethel, one in Dan, and told the people, "Here are your gods, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." The same words, the same sin. Jeroboam was replaying the worst moment in Israel's history. He chose the calf over the covenant, all over again. He established his own religious leadership, appointing individuals not from the traditional priestly lineage. This was intended as a protective measure. The priesthood was a calling God assigned to one family to protect worship's integrity. He invented his own festival calendar, moving the feast from the 7th month to the 8th. New gods, new priests, new calendar. He rebuilt worship from scratch, designed around his own needs. And this thing became a sin. That phrase haunts every chapter to the exile. Every king who follows is evaluated against Jeroboam's template. The answer is always yes. Jeroboam reigned 22 years. He set the pattern. When you fear losing your grip on power, replace God. His son Nadab inherited the throne next. Nadab reigned just 2 years. The text gives him barely a paragraph. He did evil, walking in the way of his father. While Nadab's army was besieging a Philistine city, Baasha conspired against him, seized the crown. That's the first assassination in the northern kingdom. It won't be the last. Baasha, who murdered his way onto the throne, wiped out every member of Jeroboam's family. This fulfilled a prophecy God had spoken through the prophet Ahijah against Jeroboam's house. Baasha, God's instrument of judgment against Jeroboam, committed the exact same sins. He reigned 24 years. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, walking in the way of Jeroboam. God sent a prophet named Jehu to deliver a message to Baasha. "I will utterly sweep away Baasha and his house." Can you feel the cycle forming? A man rises, a man sins, a prophet pronounces judgment, the house falls. Baasha's son Elah took the throne next. He reigned 2 years. Elah was in Tirzah, the capital, drinking himself drunk. His servant Zimri killed him. While the king lay intoxicated in someone else's house, his own servant, Zimri, killed him. That's a portrait of what happens when a throne has no moral foundation under it. And then came Zimri, whose reign lasted 7 days. He burned himself alive. Zimri destroyed every male relative of Baasha's family, fulfilling the prophecy. When the army heard, they proclaimed Omri as king instead. Omri marched on Tirzah. When Zimri saw the city was lost, he burned himself over with fire and died. 7 days on the throne. The gravitational pull of the pattern was that strong. 5 kings, 2 assassinations, 1 suicide, a dynasty erased twice. All walked in Jeroboam's way. The counterfeit worship Jeroboam invented became the default setting of an entire nation. And nobody could find the reset button. Now things shift. The 6th king, Omri, consolidated power after a civil war. The Bible gives Omri about 6 verses. Most of that is the standard formula. He did evil. He walked in the ways of Jeroboam. He sinned worse than all before him. But outside the Bible, Omri was a giant. He was so powerful on the international stage. Assyrian records referred to the entire northern kingdom as Bit Humria, the house of Omri. The Mesha Stele confirms Israel existed, names kings, references Yahweh, earliest outside mention. Omri also founded Samaria, building a new capital city and making it Israel's political center. Samaria's archaeological remains reveal sophisticated masonry, large buildings, wealth, and power. And the Bible barely notices. Because for biblical writers, political success counted for nothing. Omri couldn't walk faithfully with the God who gave him the kingdom in the first place. The 7th king, Omri's son Ahab, took things to a place nobody had gone before. Ahab raised the floor. The text identifies the reason with precision. Verse 31. As if it had been a light thing for him to walk in Jeroboam's sins, he took Jezebel as wife. Jeroboam's golden calves weren't enough. Ahab layered Baal worship on top of them. Bringing Baal worship into Israel wasn't just adding a second religion. It was replacing God. It was replacing the God who rescued them from Egypt with the gods they were supposed to be different from. His wife Jezebel launched a campaign to suppress the worship of the traditional deity, seeking out its adherents. Obadiah risked his life to hide 100 prophets in caves, feeding them bread and water in secret. Into that darkness, God sent Elijah. His name, "My God is Yahweh," was the sermon. Elijah appeared before Ahab with a single, devastating announcement: neither dew nor rain. A drought for 3.5 years. A targeted strike against Baal, the storm god. Baal couldn't send rain. The confrontation on Mount Carmel became the climax. A wise figure told the people, "How long will you hesitate between 2 different paths?" The Hebrew word Pasach echoes Passover, the festival celebrating God saving Israel. The people God leaped over to save were now limping between 2 altars, unable to commit. The prophets of Baal cried out from morning until noon. Nothing. They cut themselves. Nothing. Elijah drenched his altar with 12 jars of water, prayed, and fire fell from heaven. The people fell on their faces and cried, "The Lord, He is God." But Ahab didn't change his ways. He went home and told Jezebel, who vowed to eliminate the wise figure. A man named Naboth, owned a vineyard next to the royal palace that Ahab wanted. Naboth refused. The land was his family's inheritance, protected under God's law. Ahab sulked like a child. Jezebel asked, "Are you not the king? I'll get you the vineyard." She forged letters, arranged a false trial, had Naboth executed, and seized the vineyard. Elijah met Ahab in that stolen vineyard with a powerful message from a higher power that resonated deeply. When they washed his chariot, dogs licked up his blood, just as the Lord had declared. After Ahab, his son Ahaziah took the throne. He reigned 2 years. He fell through a lattice and was badly injured. His first response was to inquire of Baal-zebub. God sent Elijah to intercept them with a question that haunts every king on this list. Is it because there is no God in Israel that you are going to inquire of Baal-zebub? The question wasn't about God's absence. God was right there. It was about the king's refusal to see it. Ahaziah died from his injuries, childless. The throne passed to his brother. That brother was Jehoram, the last king from the dynasty of Omri and Ahab. He took one symbol down, but still clung to Jeroboam's sins, the golden calves. He peeled off one layer and left the rest standing, a picture of partial reform. In the Bible's economy, partial reform is still failure. Jehoram was sitting on the throne when the entire house of Omri came crashing down. The 10th king, Jehu, changed the tempo of everything. A higher power had given a wise figure 3 significant tasks: to designate a leader named Hazael. He poured oil on his head and declared, "Thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel. You shall bring about the downfall of a figure named Ahab's lineage, so I may address the injustices against my loyal followers." The young prophet opened the door and ran. He knew what those words would unleash. Jehu drove his chariot toward Jezreel, where King Jehoram was recovering from battle wounds. He killed Jehoram with an arrow to the heart in Naboth's vineyard, where Ahab committed his crime. He ordered the body thrown on that soil, remembering the Lord's judgment against Ahab. He rode to the palace where Jezebel waited, adorned and defiant, and ordered her removal from the window. Traces of crimson appeared on the wall and horses. Animals scavenged her remains, as a wise figure had foretold.